It didn't come from a royal insider, a palace aide, or even a trusted journalist. It came from the one voice the palace hoped would remain silent forever. Meghan Markle's father has finally spoken out, and what he revealed has sent quiet shockwaves through the inner circles of the monarchy. But why now? And what truth was so dangerous that it had to be buried for years? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, his voice existed only on the fringes, occasionally referenced, often dismissed, and carefully kept at a distance from the polished narrative that surrounded Meghan's rise into royal life. But now, that silence has been broken in a way that feels deliberate, almost calculated. Reports suggest that this was not a spontaneous decision. Those following the situation closely have begun to notice a pattern's subtle signals, quiet preparations, and a growing sense that something significant was about to surface. And when it finally did, it did not arrive with chaos or confusion. It arrived with clarity. The reappearance of Meghan's father in the public conversation has immediately reignited questions that many believed had already been answered. His long-standing estrangement from his daughter was never a simple story, yet it was often presented as one, a distant relationship, and a breakdown before the wedding. A series of misunderstandings that spiraled into silence. But now, as he steps forward once again, that simplified version begins to unravel, because what he is suggesting does not align neatly with the narrative that has been repeated for years, and that is where the tension begins to build. Inside royal circles, the reaction has been anything but loud. There have been no dramatic statements, no immediate denials, no visible attempts to confront what has been said. Instead, what has emerged is something far more telling: restraint, controlled silence. The kind of silence that signals awareness rather than ignorance. Insiders whisper that conversations behind closed doors have taken on a different tone, one that carries a sense of urgency without ever revealing it publicly. Because this is not just about one man speaking out, it is about what his words might unlock. Media observers have also taken notice. There is a shift in the way this story is being handled. A subtle but unmistakable change in the energy surrounding it. Analysts who once treated this as a closed chapter are now revisiting old timelines, re-examining past statements, and asking new questions. Why now? What changed? And perhaps most importantly, what does he know that has made this moment feel necessary? Because in a world as carefully managed as the monarchy, timing is never accidental. And as those questions begin to multiply, so do the whispers. Quiet suggestions that this may not be an isolated moment, but the beginning of something much larger. Something that reaches deeper into the past than anyone expected. Something that challenges not just personal relationships, but the very story that has been presented to the world. Because once a voice like this breaks its silence, it rarely stops at just one revelation. But what he said wasn't just emotional, it pointed to a past the palace had worked tirelessly to keep out of sight. Long before royal titles and global headlines, there was already a fracture, one that never truly healed. Behind the polished image of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's fairy tale, a deeply personal family conflict was quietly unfolding. And now, that fracture is being exposed in ways the monarchy cannot easily contain. What once appeared to be a simple case of distance between a father and daughter was, in reality, far more complicated, layered with emotion, misunderstanding, and a growing sense of mistrust that never fully faded. Long before the world watched Meghan step into the global spotlight, there were already signs of strain. Reports suggest that communication between her and her father had become increasingly inconsistent, marked by moments of closeness followed by long periods of silence. It was not a clean break. It was something slower, more painful, a fracture that widened over time without ever completely snapping. As the royal wedding approached in 2018, that fracture became impossible to ignore. What should have been a moment of unity instead revealed just how deep the divide had become. The breakdown in communication was not just private, it spilled into the public sphere in ways that neither side seemed prepared for. Headlines began to form narratives before the full story was even understood. And in the middle of it all, the palace found itself facing a situation it could not fully control. Because this was not a matter of protocol or tradition, it was personal. And personal conflicts do not follow royal rules. The controversies that followed only intensified the situation. Each development added another layer of tension, another reason for the distance to grow. Public perception quickly took shape, often reducing a deeply emotional and complex relationship into something far more simplified. On one side, there was sympathy. On the other, there was skepticism. But beneath those surface reactions, the reality remained far more unsettled. Because unresolved conflict does not disappear simply because it is no longer discussed. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it returns when least expected. In those early days, the palace chose a path that seemed strategic at the time distance. There were no direct interventions, no visible attempts to reconcile what was unfolding. Instead, the situation was allowed to exist outside the royal framework, treated as something separate from the institution itself. But that decision came with its own consequences. By stepping back, the palace also surrendered a degree of control over the narrative, and as the story continued to evolve, that absence became more noticeable. At the same time, a carefully shaped emotional narrative began to take hold in the public imagination. It was a story of separation, of difficult choices, of moving forward despite the past, and for a while, that narrative held. It provided a sense of closure, a way to move beyond the discomfort of unresolved questions. But closure, when it is built on incomplete understanding, is often temporary, because the truth, whatever it may be, has a way of resurfacing. And that is what makes this moment so significant, because what was once treated as a closed chapter is now being reopened, not by speculation or rumor, but by the very person at the center of it. The conflict that never truly disappeared is now stepping back into the light, carrying with it all the unanswered questions that were left behind. And as those questions begin to take shape once again, the narrative that once seemed settled starts to shift in ways no one can fully predict. But the real shock wasn't the past, it was the details he's now bringing into the present. What he revealed wasn't vague or emotional, it was specific, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. According to emerging reports, Meghan Markle's father has made claims that challenge the very narrative that defined her royal journey. And if even part of it holds truth, the implications could ripple far beyond personal drama. For years, the story surrounding Meghan's relationship with her father was presented in broad strokes, simple, digestible, and emotionally framed in a way that encouraged closure. But now, that clarity is being replaced with something far more unsettling. Because what is being suggested does not just add detail to the existing narrative, it reshapes it. Reports indicate that his statements are not built on emotion alone, but on moments, timelines, and interactions that appear carefully remembered and intentionally shared. And that precision is what makes this situation impossible to dismiss. Among the most striking elements of his claims are suggestions that certain aspects of their relationship may have been misunderstood or perhaps even misrepresented, not in a way that can be easily disproven, but in a way that invites doubt. A subtle but powerful shift, because when a long-established narrative is challenged, even slightly, it forces people to reconsider everything they thought they knew. And in this case, that reconsideration is happening on a global scale. What makes this even more complex is how these claims directly contrast with the version of events that has been widely accepted for years. The emotional narrative that once seemed complete now appears to have gaps that are being filled with new perspectives, new interpretations, and new questions. And those questions are not easy ones. They do not offer simple answers or comfortable conclusions. Instead, they create tension, uncertainty, a growing sense that the truth may be far more layered than anyone initially believed. Media outlets have responded quickly, but not uniformly. Some are approaching the situation with caution, carefully analyzing each statement, while others are diving deeper, attempting to piece together timelines and verify details that had long been left unexplored. Analysts are revisiting past interviews, comparing public statements, and searching for inconsistencies that may now take on new meaning. Because when a story like this resurfaces, it does not remain contained, it expands, pulling everything connected to it back into focus. At the same time, royal observers have begun to highlight the timing of these revelations. Why now? Why speak with such clarity after years of silence? Some suggest that this moment is not coincidental, that it reflects a broader shift in circumstances, both personal and institutional. Because timing, in situations like this, is rarely accidental. It is often strategic, intentional, designed to have maximum impact, and if that is the case here, then this may only be the beginning. That possibility is what has begun to fuel growing speculation, because if these are the first details being brought forward, what else might follow? What other pieces of the story remain untold? And how might those pieces further challenge the narrative that has shaped public understanding for so long? The uncertainty itself becomes part of the story, creating a sense of anticipation that continues to build with each passing moment. And as that anticipation grows, so does the pressure not just on the individuals involved, but on the institution that has, until now, managed to remain at a distance from this deeply personal conflict. Because the more specific the claims become, the harder it is to maintain that distance, the harder it is to remain silent, and the more the situation begins to shift from a private matter into something far more public, far more complex, and far more difficult to contain. And it's not just the public reacting. The palace itself is now being forced into a position it tried to avoid. Behind the guarded gates and carefully controlled statements, something has shifted. Those familiar with palace operations suggest an unusual level of internal concern following the remarks. Because this isn't just a family dispute anymore, it's a narrative battle, and the stakes are far higher than they appear. What makes this moment different is not the volume of the reaction, but the nature of it. The palace has faced controversy before, storms that seemed overwhelming in the moment, but were eventually managed through silence, patience, and time. That strategy has long been its strongest defense. Say nothing. Reveal nothing. Allow the noise to fade. But this time, insiders whisper that the silence feels heavier, more deliberate. Not because the situation is being ignored, but because it is being carefully assessed behind closed doors. Reports suggest that senior aides have already begun a series of urgent internal discussions, attempting to map out what this could mean not just in the present, but in the days and weeks ahead. These are not casual conversations. They are calculated, measured, and focused on one central question: how far could this go? Because when a personal story begins to evolve into a public narrative conflict, the risks multiply quickly. And in an institution where perception is everything, even a small shift in public understanding can have lasting consequences. At the heart of these concerns is reputation. Not just the reputation of individuals, but of the monarchy itself. For decades, the institution has relied on a carefully maintained image, one built on stability, dignity, and control. But situations like this challenge that image in ways that are difficult to predict, because this is not a single headline that can be managed or redirected. It is an unfolding story, one that continues to evolve with every new detail, every new interpretation, and every unanswered question. That is precisely why this moment feels harder to contain than previous controversies. In the past, distance was an effective shield. The palace could step back, allow external issues to remain external, and maintain its position above the conflict. But now, that separation is becoming increasingly fragile. Because the narrative being challenged is not entirely outside the institution, it intersects with it. And that intersection is where the tension begins to rise. There is also the growing risk of intensified media scrutiny. Already, the tone of coverage has begun to shift. What was once treated as background noise is now being examined with renewed attention. Analysts are revisiting timelines, comparing past statements, and questioning details that were previously accepted without hesitation. And as this scrutiny deepens, the margin for silence becomes narrower, because the more questions are asked, the more noticeable the lack of answers becomes. Subtle signs of unease have also begun to emerge in ways that are difficult to ignore, not through direct acknowledgement but through small, almost imperceptible shifts, a change in tone, a carefully chosen word, a moment of hesitation where there was once certainty. These are not dramatic signals, but in an environment as controlled as the monarchy, even the smallest deviation can carry meaning. And those who are watching closely have begun to notice. All of this points to a deeper reality. This is no longer a contained situation. It is expanding, reaching into areas that were never meant to be part of the conversation. And as it expands, the ability to control it diminishes, because narratives, once challenged, rarely return to their original form. They evolve, they fracture, they reveal new layers that cannot easily be hidden again. And that is what makes this moment so critical. Not just what has already been said, but what it suggests could still come. Because if this is only the beginning, then the palace is not just dealing with a reaction, it is preparing for a sequence. A progression of revelations that may unfold over time, each one building on the last, each one harder to contain than the one before. But the deeper issue isn't just what's been said, it's what could still be revealed. If this was only the beginning, then what follows could be far more damaging, because according to some insiders, this may not be a one-time statement but the opening of a door that cannot easily be closed again. And the palace knows it. What has already been said is enough to unsettle a carefully managed narrative, but what has not yet been said is what truly lingers in the background. There is a growing belief among observers that this moment is not an isolated event, but part of a larger sequence, one that may unfold gradually, piece by piece, revealing more with each step. And that possibility is what creates the tension now building beneath the surface. Because when a voice that has remained silent for so long suddenly begins to speak with clarity, it rarely stops after a single moment. It continues. It expands. It reaches further than anyone initially expected. Speculation is already beginning to take shape. Some suggest that additional interviews could follow, each one adding new layers to a story that is still far from complete. Others believe that there may be more structured revelations ahead, statements that are not spontaneous, but carefully planned, designed to build momentum over time. And if that is true, then what the world has heard so far may only be the introduction to something much larger, something far more difficult to contain once it fully unfolds. There are also concerns about what might exist beyond spoken words, because in situations like this, it is not just what is said that carries weight, it is what can be supported. The possibility of documentation, of records, of details that can be referenced or revisited, adds another layer of complexity. It shifts the conversation from interpretation to verification. And once that shift happens, the stakes rise dramatically, because evidence, or even the suggestion of it, has a way of changing how a story is perceived, how it is reported, and how it ultimately settles in the public mind. The media, already alert, is preparing for exactly that kind of unfolding. This is no longer being treated as a brief moment of attention, but as a developing narrative that could stretch over time. Analysts are positioning themselves not just to report, but to track, to connect, to anticipate what may come next. And as that anticipation grows, so does the intensity of the coverage, because prolonged stories do not simply fade, they evolve. They deepen. They become part of a larger conversation that extends far beyond the initial moment. At the center of that conversation is the potential impact on Meghan Markle and Prince Harry themselves. Their story has already been one of intense global scrutiny, marked by moments of support and moments of criticism. But this development threatens to reopen debates that had, at least temporarily, begun to settle. Old questions may return. New ones may emerge. And the balance they have worked to maintain could once again be tested in ways that are both public and deeply personal. For the monarchy, the implications are just as significant. This is an institution that relies on stability, on continuity, on the careful management of its public image. But stories like this introduce unpredictability. They create variables that cannot be easily controlled or redirected. And as those variables begin to multiply, the challenge becomes not just managing the present, but anticipating the future. Because once a narrative begins to move beyond the boundaries set for it, regaining control becomes increasingly difficult. That is the underlying concern now taking shape, the possibility of losing control over the story entirely. Not in a dramatic, immediate sense, but gradually, step by step, as new details emerge and new interpretations take hold. Because control, in this context, is not about silence, it is about direction. And when the direction of a narrative begins to shift, it can carry everything with it. Public perception, media focus, even the internal balance within the institution itself. And as all of this continues to unfold, one thing becomes increasingly clear: this is no longer about a single moment or a single statement. It is about what that moment has set into motion. A chain of possibilities that cannot easily be reversed, and a level of uncertainty that continues to grow with each passing day. Because when a story begins to move in this way, it does not simply pause. It continues forward, drawing more attention, more scrutiny, and more questions with it. And as the uncertainty grows, one question begins to overshadow everything else. Amid the noise, the speculation, and the rising tension, one voice remains notably absent. Meghan Markle has not responded. And in a situation this volatile, silence can sometimes speak louder than words. And in moments like these, absence is never neutral. It becomes a presence of its own, felt, analyzed, and questioned from every angle. As the conversation continues to grow louder, Meghan's decision to remain silent has only intensified the focus on her. Not because silence is unusual, but because of what surrounds it: the timing, the pressure, the expectation. All of it creates a space where every passing moment without a response begins to carry meaning, whether intended or not. There are those who believe this silence is strategic, that it is not hesitation, but control. The calculated pause designed to allow the situation to fully unfold before stepping in. Because responding too quickly can sometimes limit the narrative, while waiting allows it to expand, revealing its strengths, its weaknesses, and the exact moment where intervention will have the greatest impact. If that is the case, then this silence is not passive. It is deliberate, measured, part of a larger approach that has yet to reveal itself. Others, however, interpret it differently. They see the silence not as strategy, but as pressure, a moment of uncertainty where the right response is not immediately clear. Because this situation is unlike previous challenges. It is deeply personal, yet unfolding in a very public way. And responding to something that continues to evolve in real time carries its own risks. Say too much, and the narrative could escalate. Say too little, and the absence becomes the story itself. It is a balance that is difficult to maintain, even under the best circumstances. This is not the first time silence has played a role in shaping perception. In the past, there have been moments where the lack of an immediate response was followed by something far more impactful: a carefully crafted statement, an interview, a shift in narrative that reframed the entire situation. And because of that history, the current silence is not being ignored. It is being watched closely, with the understanding that what comes next could redefine everything that has been said so far. Public reaction reflects this uncertainty. Some interpret the silence as strength, a refusal to engage in speculation or respond to claims that may not warrant acknowledgement. Others see it as avoidance, a delay that only deepens the questions already forming. Media coverage has mirrored this divide, with analysts offering competing interpretations, each one attempting to make sense of what cannot yet be confirmed. And in the absence of clarity, interpretation becomes the dominant force. But beneath all of these perspectives, one thing remains constant: the pressure is building, not just from the public or the media, but from the situation itself. But because the longer the silence continues, the more significant the eventual response becomes. Expectations rise, stakes increase, and the moment of breaking that silence, when it finally comes, carries far more weight than it would have at the beginning. That is the paradox of silence in a moment like this. It can protect, but it can also amplify. It can delay, but it can also intensify. And as the story continues to evolve, that silence becomes less of a pause and more of a turning point waiting to happen. Because whatever comes next will not exist in isolation. It will be shaped by everything that has led to this moment, and everything that has been left unsaid. But this story isn't just about one response, it's about what this moment reveals about the monarchy itself. For an institution built on control, tradition, and carefully managed narratives, moments like this are more than uncomfortable, they are destabilizing. Because when personal stories collide with public duty, even the strongest institutions can begin to feel the strain. The monarchy has long existed in a delicate balance between visibility and distance. It must be seen yet not exposed, heard yet not drawn into every conversation. That balance, once easier to maintain, has become increasingly fragile in the modern media era. Every development, no matter how personal, now unfolds under a global spotlight that never dims. Stories do not fade quietly anymore. They expand, circulate, and return with greater intensity. And in this environment, even the most controlled narratives can begin to shift beyond the institution's reach. This is not the first time the monarchy has faced pressure. History is filled with moments that tested its resilience: periods of public scrutiny, internal conflict, and external criticism. Each time, the institution relied on its most powerful tools: patience, silence, and the steady passage of time. And often those tools worked. The storms passed, the narrative stabilized. But what makes this moment different is not just the challenge itself, it is the nature of how that challenge is unfolding. Because this is not a single controversy that can be addressed and contained. It is something more fluid, more unpredictable. A situation rooted in deeply personal relationships, yet playing out in a space where everything becomes public. Managing that kind of conflict is far more complex. It is not governed by protocol or tradition alone. It is shaped by emotion, perception, and the unpredictable ways in which stories evolve once they enter the public domain. And that unpredictability is what makes this moment so difficult to navigate. The global spotlight only intensifies that difficulty. Every statement, every silence, every subtle shift is examined, interpreted, and often amplified. There is no neutral ground, no quiet space where issues can be resolved without observation. And as attention grows, so does the pressure to respond, to clarify, to maintain control over a narrative that is constantly moving. Because in a world where perception can change overnight, maintaining authority is no longer just about actions, it is about how those actions are understood. That is where perception becomes central. The monarchy does not rely solely on power or tradition. It relies on trust, on the belief that it represents stability, continuity, and a sense of order that remains steady even in uncertain times. But perception is fragile. It can be strengthened over years and questioned in moments. And when personal stories begin to challenge that perception, even indirectly, the impact can extend far beyond the individuals involved. It can reach into the very foundation of how the institution is viewed. What makes this situation feel different from previous crises is precisely that sense of uncertainty. In the past, there was often a clear path forward, even if it required time. Now, the path is less defined. The story is still unfolding. New elements continue to emerge, and the outcome is far from certain. It is not just about resolving what has already happened, it is about anticipating what might happen next, and how each development could reshape the narrative in ways that cannot be easily predicted. And within that uncertainty lies the real challenge. Because the monarchy is not just responding to events, it is responding to possibilities, to questions that have not yet been answered, to revelations that may or may not come. And in doing so, it must navigate a situation where control is no longer absolute, where the narrative is shared, contested, and constantly evolving. And as the dust begins to settle, the true impact of this moment is only just starting to unfold. What started as a single voice breaking years of silence has now become something much larger, something that cannot simply be contained or dismissed. Because once certain truths begin to surface, they have a way of reshaping everything around them. At first, it seemed like a moment that would pass another chapter in a long, complicated story that had already seen its share of public attention. But that assumption did not hold for long. Because what has unfolded since is not just a reaction, it is a transformation. The words spoken have begun to echo far beyond their original context, raising questions that extend into how the story itself has been told, understood, and accepted. And once those questions take hold, they do not easily fade. They linger. They grow. They demand to be answered. The lasting implications of this moment are already beginning to take shape, not in dramatic declarations, but in subtle shifts in how people are revisiting what they once believed, in how narratives are being reconsidered, and in how perspectives are beginning to evolve. Because when a long-standing version of events is challenged, even slightly, it opens the door to reevaluation. And that reevaluation does not stop at one detail. It spreads, touching everything connected to it. For Meghan Markle, this moment carries a weight that goes beyond public perception. It reaches into the deeply personal, into a relationship that has now been brought back into the spotlight in a way that cannot easily be reversed. And for Prince Harry, it introduces another layer of complexity to a story that has already been defined by scrutiny and tension. Because when personal histories resurface, they do not return quietly. They return with all the emotion, all the unresolved questions, and all the intensity that was left behind. At the same time, the uncertainty surrounding what happens next continues to grow. There are no clear answers, no defined path forward, only a series of possibilities that remain open. Will more be revealed? Will the narrative continue to shift? Or will silence once again take hold, leaving the questions unresolved? That uncertainty becomes part of the story itself, shaping how it is followed, how it is discussed, and how it ultimately settles in the public mind. For the monarchy, the challenge is both immediate and long-term. Regaining control over a narrative that has begun to move beyond its influence is not a simple task. It requires more than silence, more than patience. It requires a careful understanding of how perception is evolving, and how each moment contributes to a larger picture that cannot be easily redirected. Because once a narrative begins to reshape itself, returning it to its original form becomes increasingly difficult. But beyond the institution, there is also the personal toll, the emotional weight carried by those at the center of it all. These are not just public figures navigating a public story. They are individuals dealing with deeply personal realities that have been brought into the open once again. And that contrast between public attention and private experience is where the true intensity of this moment lies. Because it is not just about what is seen or heard. It is about what is felt, what is remembered, and what remains unresolved. And in the midst of all of this, a broader question begins to emerge, one that extends far beyond this single story. What is truth when it exists alongside narrative? What happens when image and reality begin to diverge? And how does legacy take shape when both are constantly being redefined? These are not simple questions, and they do not offer easy answers. But they are the questions that now sit at the heart of this moment, shaping its meaning in ways that will continue long after the immediate story has moved on. Because in the end, this was never just about one voice, it was about the story that voice was finally ready to tell. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.